this? Well, we're getting our first look at what is the entire card for the Keith Thurman versus Manny Pacquiao WBA welterweight title fight. And I have to say that the card in its entirety, not just the main event, but the entire card, is shaping up nicely. A lot of times, you'll get a marquee matchup between two notoriable fighters, but the undercard, the prelude to what is the main event, it just doesn't quite deliver. It's not giving you enough bang for your buck, whereas I can wholeheartedly say that this card in its entirety, several of the matches featured on the card, are genuinely intriguing fights. I mean, you're going to get to see Efe Ajagba, in action against another undefeated fighter like himself, Ali Efren Demirezin,
Undefeated.
This Ali guy, he doesn't have the buzz that Efe Ajagba does, but better still, it's undefeated contender versus undefeated contender, undefeated prospect versus undefeated prospect, and that adds a lot of intrigue to the card. Just as well, you've got two more undefeated fighters, one a champion and one a challenger, in Caleb Plant versus Mike Lee, a fight I've discussed. I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. Then you have a fight between Sergey Lipinets, former IBF 140-pound champion Sergey Lipinets, Sergey newbie to what is the welterweight division, because he's since moved up from 140 pounds, squaring off against a live dog in John Molina. John Molina, who, yes, he has several career losses, but better still, he brings a wealth of experience that Sergey Lipinets hasn't even had the opportunity to amass yet. Sergey's only got, 16 fights, something like that? Whereas John Molina, he swapped punches with a who's who of fighters, win or lose. These are experiences that he has to draw from, whereas in the case of Sergey, not only is he a bit green in terms of the welterweight division, but as a professional, he's a bit green. So it's intriguing because it's not a foregone conclusion that either Sergey or John wins this fight. Could be that John's height and his jab, all his wealth of experience as a professional, the different fighters that he's fought over time, could be that that's enough for him to edge out Sergey Lipinets. In turn, Sergey, being the fresher fighter of the two, the less war-torn fighter, maybe his exuberance, momentum, and enthusiasm is enough for him to win this fight. I mean, if you guys didn't catch the beating that he put on Lamont Peterson, I suggest you do, ahead of what is a fight, an upcoming fight, with John Molina. It is an intriguing matchup, and that's just one of the fights on the card. There's also Luis Nery versus Juan Carlos Payano, the same Payano that Naoya Inoue dispatched in but one round. With the first 1-2, that was all it took to get that guy out of there. Oftentimes in boxing, we talk about triangle theories. We talk about how, cross-comparing opponents doesn't always forecast an outcome. But better still, people do it. People are going to want to see if Luis Nery can dispatch Payano as easily as Naoya Inoue did. Luis Nery, who famously put quite a beating on
2 times
Yamanaka, not once, but twice. You understand? He's on the comeback trail. He's trying to get back into the conversation. And a stellar knockout over Juan Carlos Payano, that might help him along. We then have what is the chief support for the main event, the chief support for the card itself. We've got the fight between Yordenis Ugas, who very much has the look of a pure boxer, and Omar Figueroa, who very much has the look of an inside, aggressive pressure fighter. More often than not, pressure fighters, they do seem to be the kryptonite for a long-range, outside, hit and not get hit pure boxer. But what makes this fight intriguing is the level at which the fighters operate. That's saying that, the style that the fighter uses, that determines, what are his characteristics as a fighter. Is he really aggressive? Is he really defensively minded? You have the style that the fighter uses, and then you have the level that the fighter operates, the level at which the fighter operates with that style. You got your A level, your A plus, your A minus, your B, your B plus, your B minus, so on and so forth. And in a situation where you've got two fighters that have opposing styles, Omar Figueroa having a stylistic advantage here because he's a pressure fighter. If anybody knows how to give a pure boxer a long night, it is a pressure fighter, because he's not going to give him the room and the real estate to fight at a comfortable pace. He's going to keep his foot on the gas, he's going to keep forcing the action, pressing the issue, and luring that pure boxer into exchanges that, they may or may not want to be in. And I'll tell you that what makes the matchup intriguing is because, yes, Omar Figueroa does seem to have the right style for the job, But, his last outing, I'll say that in his last outing, he didn't really look the part. He didn't look like the same guy that beat the brakes off of Robert Guerrero. I have to say that John Molina, who he fought in his last fight, I felt like John Molina had done enough to get a draw at least, whereas, Omar Figueroa was afforded the decision. He was afforded the win. He was given the nod. In other words, Omar Figueroa has looked better. And ahead of a fight with Yordenis Ugas, who's coming off a competitive loss. It's funny because, one of these guys is coming off a win and one of these guys is coming off a loss. But the guy who's coming off the loss actually had the better outing, the better showing in his last fight. That's a part of what makes this intriguing, that it's not a foregone conclusion that Omar Figueroa wins this fight just because he's got the right style for the job. Because Omar, he has looked better. So there's going to be a lot to talk about the weekend of the fight, the weekend of Manny Pacquiao versus Keith Thurman and all the different fights that are on that undercard. But my initial impression of the card is worth the money. That this is one of the better cards that we're going to see put on pay-per-view. This card is worth the ticket price. In the realm of main events, it's actually an intriguing main event, a far more intriguing main event than Spence versus Garcia, and just as a card overall, the entirety of the card, every single matchup featured within it. It's a better card than anything that PBC has put on pay-per-view so far. That is in the realm of all their recent pay-per-views. Spence versus Garcia, Wilder versus Fury, Pacquiao versus Broner. This card is superior to those cards in almost every single way. So I think that this is actually a card that's worth the pay-per-view price. PBC finally decided to do something right. And, stop trying to sell people filler fights and sell fight fans fights that are actually worth watching. And a good amount of these fights are definitely worth watching. So the PBC finally did something right with this card. And in relation with this card, its main event, and the particulars associated with that, Rick Glacier, very well-known boxing personality and insider, had this to say via Facebook. He says, "Let's let it fly. No VADA testing for Pacquiao-Thurman, but the Nevada State Athletic Commission is going to do the testing. That's like leaving a pedophile to watch your child while you're out of town. Shame on everyone involved. Many asking yours truly, who do I like in Pacquiao-Thurman? I'm telling everyone, with no VADA testing, whoever glows in the dark more is the one that I like." What we can deduce from Rick Glacier's statement, Rick Glacier, who's a boxing insider, he knows the sport, and what we can deduce is that, he doesn't have a lot of faith, he doesn't have a lot of stock in what is the Nevada State Athletic Commission's testing. He doesn't think it's equivocal, it's the equivalent of VADA's testing. That's what he's communicating here. I'm sure that most of you have gotten a chance to react to this news already, but myself, I didn't get the chance, so these are just my thoughts. I find it peculiar. I don't think it's a good look. I think it kind of taints the event, that where VADA has been involved in almost every big fight, or any fight of some significance in recent memory, all of a sudden, for this fight, the guys have decided to go another way. And one of the guys, some people seem to think that one of these guys is a dirty fighter. He's just a dirty fighter that never got caught. Talking about Manny Pacquiao, I'm sure a lot of people are still just as sensitive about this now as they were all those years ago when it was about Manny and Floyd. I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are very sensitive when it comes to this subject, and that's all well and good. You're entitled to your opinion just as much as I'm entitled to mine. But I'll say that in a situation like this, where all of a sudden VADA, that's been as much a part of the sport of boxing in recent memory as the mouth guards and the gloves, for them to not be involved, all of a sudden, it fuels people's suspicions. You know that this is a WBA title fight, right? And you know that the WBA has something called the Fair Boxing Program. A part of the bylaws in regards to the Fair Boxing Program is that any top 5 fighter has to be subject to random testing from VADA, okay? Now, both Manny and Keith, they're both top 5 guys in the WBA's ranks. So what's going on here that VADA is not involved? Whose idea, at whose request, was this? Even in a situation where both Manny and Keith might have reached a deal as far as who they want to be in charge of the testing for what is their fight, the WBA's title Two of them, actually.
You mean one.
Really one, but that's neither here nor there. The WBA's title is still the title that's on the line, the full version of what is the WBA title. So Manny and Keith reaching a deal amongst themselves doesn't speak to what the WBA should be demanding. I mean, if it's their title, they should be demanding that VADA be the anti-doping agency used for this fight. And yet we don't hear anything from the WBA. They're not asserting themselves. It very much seems like they are choosing to sit on their hands. Likely because they know they're going to collect hefty sanctioning fees from this fight one way or another, whether the fighters are clean or they're not clean. That's one way to look at it. I mean, has anyone seen an official statement from the WBA giving their stance on VADA not being used for this fight? VADA themselves have not released an official statement explaining and detailing to the boxing community why all of a sudden they've been left out of the loop. Most of this is left to the imagination. It's all speculation, and when there's room for speculation, there is room for wild accusations. But rest assured, those accusations are coming from the fact that where VADA has been involved in almost every single fight of any significance, here in this one, they're not. And since nobody's answering the hard questions, there's plenty of wiggle room to jump to conclusions. Look, let's be honest with ourselves. One of the fighters involved in what is this card's main event, one of them, was thought of by some and is thought of by some as a fighter who may have been juicing and he just never got caught. And that fighter is not Keith Thurman. I'm not telling you to think that Manny's on something, you understand? I'm not telling you to think that. I'm saying that there are people out there that already thought that before this fight even came into fruition, before the ink dried on the contracts to this fight. There were already people out there that thought that Manny Pacquiao was a dirty fighter. Okay, that if there's a fighter that was ever under the microscope as possibly being a guy that is juicing or has juiced in the past, it ain't Keith Thurman. The fighter that some people think is a dirty fighter in association with this fight is Manny Pacquiao. And this recent development that all of a sudden VADA's not going to be involved, well, it further fuels those suspicions because let's be honest, if there's an A-side involved in this fight, it's Manny Pacquiao. It's not Keith Thurman. Keith Thurman don't call the shots in this fight. I mean, you might be the reigning champion, but you ain't the A-side. Not in this situation. If anybody has the power and the leverage to dictate terms, it would be Manny Pacquiao. So is it possible that VADA is being left out of this situation at the request of Manny Pacquiao? Because he's the A-side. He's got the power. He's got the leverage. Keith just has a belt for Manny to win. That's about it. A-sides and B-sides. And what exactly determines who the A-side is? Marquee value. Who generates more revenue? Who's a bigger pay-per-view attraction? Who's the star? Well, in this situation, Keith Thurman's not the marquee fighter. Keith Thurman's not the pay-per-view attraction. He's never been on pay-per-view. This is going to be his pay-per-view debut. We know who the pay-per-view attraction is in this fight. We know who the marquee fighter is. And by that standard, by that logic, we know who the A-side is. The A-side is Manny, and the A-side calls the shots. So is it possible? Ask yourself, is it possible that if VADA is not being involved in this particular fight, it's at the request of Manny Pacquiao? I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. I'm sorry. I don't care how you feel about it. I don't really give a shit if it hurts your feelings. At the end of the day, one of these guys is the A-side. That's Manny. And the A-side calls the shots. The A-side dictates the terms. And Manny being the A-side could be why all of a sudden VADA's not involved. Does that make him a dirty fighter by default? No. But it does suggest that. It does imply it in a form, in a manner of speaking. Because why would he, if he did, assuming he did, but if he did, why would he request that they use the Nevada State Athletic Commission's anti-doping tests instead of VADA's? VADA's is the standard, not the Nevada State Athletic Commission's. VADA's testing is the standard. It's very much becoming the standard in the sport of boxing. I wonder now, how did people who felt that Keith Thurman has everything it takes to win this fight, how are they feeling right now? Do they feel that, maybe they should change their mind on this thing, that, this development, it's a decent-sized development, it's really not the kind of thing that you overlook. Does this change your minds as far as who you think is going to win this fight and why? People these days are very cynical when it comes to performance-enhancing drugs and who might be on them. You can find a group of guys who think just about anybody and everybody is guilty. And to that effect, you have to consider that it might be possible that if VADA's not involved in this situation, it's because Manny and his team didn't want them to be. Because Keith Thurman doesn't have the power and the leverage to tell Manny what to do. Keith Thurman's not the A side. Manny is. If anybody has the kind of clout to alter the situation and dictate at what terms the fight is going to be fought, it's Manny. It really is Manny and his team. So VADA being willfully left out of this situation could be by design. And them being left out, what does that suggest? You understand? What does that mean? Why are they being left out? Are there anti-doping definitions? You know, is their banned list somehow different from the Nevada State Athletic Commission's banned list? Is that it? And does that leave a window of opportunity to use something that, you know what, it might not be on the Nevada State Athletic Commission's banned list, but it might be on VADA's. And since it's on VADA's, we're not going to use them. We're going to use Nevada's. Is it a situation like that? Look, ladies and gents, this is all speculation. Let's get that right out of the way. This is all speculation. We're just making inferences. What does it really mean when the anti-doping agency that has been at the forefront of any fight of any significance in recent memory is all of a sudden being left out of this fight? What does that suggest? Put your fandom aside and think objectively if you can. There's got to be a reason. There's got to be. And in an era of boxing where the particulars of a fight, just everything that encompasses the fine print, is mulled over, not just by the fighters and their teams, but the fans themselves, arguing about what makes sense and what doesn't, in regards to the fine print. You know? In an era of boxing where these things are mulled over and scrutinized and talked about and argued about, in an era of boxing like this one, a development like this one is not to be overlooked. Maybe it has an effect on the outcome of the fight, and maybe, just maybe, people are starting to change their minds about what they thought the outcome would be based on this. I don't think that's far-fetched. I don't think that's unreasonable, because there has to be a reason for this. That's all I'm saying.